Hey everyone, Terry here. In this video, I want to talk about the opening of the film, the city skyline at night that sort of establishes the world in which our film takes place. This sequence was probably the most elaborate visual effect in the film in terms of how many moving parts there are here. It's a combination of model miniature, light plates, photographic plates, video assets, atmospheric effects, practical lighting. I used the computer to stitch it all together, but aside from that, everything you see here is a physical asset that I either shot myself or a photo or video asset that I bought from a stock site and then chopped up and used in certain spots. This was the first thing I worked on for the film, and start to finish probably took about 2 months to complete. So not quick, mostly because I didn't know what I was doing, so I had to figure a lot of stuff out as I went along. But as much time as it took to do, it was relatively cheap to pull off, which was really important. As I'm sure I've mentioned before, the budget for this film was not very big. I think I spent around $1,000. Being the first thing you see in the film, it sets the tone visually. It tells the audience what to expect in terms of the quality, I guess, of the visuals in the film that they've just agreed to watch. So it was really important that I nail these shots. But it was also important that it be done as cheaply as possible so that I could use, the rest of that money somewhere else. The first question I had to answer was, how do I build a convincing model miniature of appropriate size and detail with essentially no money? And the answer turned out to be, you build it out of junk and recycling. So I just saved up a ton of recycling. Bottles, cans, to-go boxes, containers of all shapes and sizes, old television sets and radios and tape decks, basically anything that had a cool look to it or had various pieces and parts that I thought I could use in a model, I just saved. And once I felt like I had enough raw material, I set out gluing it all together. And this is what the thing looked like after I had finished building it, but obviously before I had painted anything. You can see how silly it looks in this state, how it's literally just a bunch of junk from my kitchen and garage and wherever. It was kit bashing, essentially, if you're familiar with that term. I was just doing it with a bunch of crap nobody wanted. Looks weird, right? Well, once painted, it looks like this. It's amazing what a couple of coats of gray primer can do to sell the effect. And after a little detail work, some brown paint for rust, some weathering here and there, I had what I thought was a pretty good looking model city. After that, it was simply a matter of lighting it properly and figuring out how to shoot it. And shoot it I did. I shot the crap out of this thing and used ultimately very little of it. I had no idea what was going to work and what wasn't, so I figured just to be safe, I would just shoot everything about it. I knew I was going to have to throw it away, too. I was going to have to destroy it when I was done because I needed that room to build the other sets, and there was nowhere to store a model of this size, so I just made sure to shoot way more than I needed, which is why we're seeing so much raw footage here. And only about 8 seconds of it ended up in the movie. Model miniatures are tricky to shoot in small spaces because in order to sell the effect to the human eye, you have to stop down pretty tremendously in terms of aperture. The eye sees in a pretty deep depth of field, so in a situation like this where I might normally want to use shallow depth of field to help hide the edges of the model or the fact that the walls of the garage are right there, I can't do it. I have to come up with another solution for those problems because you're never going to believe that this collection of junk is actually a bunch of buildings at scale if we don't use an appropriately deep depth of field. So I covered the walls of the garage in black fabric and flooded the room with smoke and haze to help sort of obfuscate the edges of our reality. And I think for the most part it worked pretty well. I think I ended up shooting most of the model stuff at around f8 or f9, which honestly is not really nearly closed enough. Ideally I would have been at least f15, f16, but I had to compromise to a degree because of the other big problem with model miniature work, which is light. Stopping down even just as much as I did requires a shitload of light to pull off because you're restricting how much light gets into the camera to a pretty great degree. So even though the shots look like this through the lens, the room during shooting actually looked just like this. It was incredibly bright in there. I had, I think, basically every light that I owned turned on and pointed at that model in some way. So all told, it probably took a month to build and paint and wire up and shoot. The rest of the time was spent in post. So now we have the raw footage we want to build upon in the computer. I did all the compositing work in DaVinci Resolve, which is the program I used to do pretty much everything for the film, really. I'm going to sort of whip through this second half of the process because if I go into any kind of great detail about how I did the layering, we'll be here forever. That said, I started by garbage matting around the buildings and then created a photographic layer of background city light and buildings out of photos that I shot myself here in Nashville or high-res photos that I bought from stock sites and just cut and pasted and made a collage out of that. Comp that into the background behind the garbage mat of the buildings, and voila, the city now looks like it stretches on for miles. Then it was simply a matter of adding lights and whatnot to the buildings themselves, using the same set of photo assets that I had made the background plate out of. At this point, we have a pretty convincing city skyline. And this is also, at this point, probably 35 or 40 layers inside of Resolve. The piece de resistance would be the lighting effects. The beacon lights that flash, the lights of the ships or cars flying around in the sky, and the occasional lens flare, to help really sell it. These effects were achieved through layering a series of light plates that I had shot in total darkness so as to blend easily, and a bunch of shots of me basically slowly waving LEDs through the air, back and forth in a completely blacked out room, wearing black clothing head to toe so that I blend into the background, and then just purposely moving them at various angles in relation to the camera lens in order to cause flares and reflections and get interesting looking movement. Then it was a simple matter of just choosing the ones I thought looked the best and moving them around, resizing them, and then comping a collection of that into the shot of the model. And it was actually kind of surprising how easily they integrated into the master shot. It really didn't take much finessing. A bit of garbage matting here and there so that certain ships or vehicles would appear to fly in front of or behind other buildings to help really sell the idea of depth and the idea that this was one three-dimensional space in which all of this stuff was actually happening at the same time. It's little details like that, little demonstrations of depth that really sell the idea that this is not only a real three-dimensional space, but that all this stuff is actually happening in front of just the one camera. And that's about it. That's how I pulled that off. As always, if you'd like to hear more about it, if you have any questions or you'd like me to go more in depth on a certain topic, leave me a comment below or hit me up on Twitter. I'm always happy to talk about this kind of stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.